Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CCC Talks with Mark O'Loughlin and the Cloud Credential Council. Now, today we're joined by Dr. Anna Tavis, who is Department Chair for Human Capital Management Programs at New York University. Now, Anna, you're a researcher, a writer, a speaker, global educator, and a coach focusing on what we love, the future of work. So, Anna, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Great. Now, Anna, you describe yourself as being passionate about developing innovative approaches to talent within organizations and to help discover a higher purpose for the next economy. So listen, tell us a little bit about yourself and your passion for this field.
Just a couple of background points. I think that will be helpful.
Sure.
I started out as an academic, but then I left academia to really go deep into the business. And I ended up in Europe, worked in London, and then in Helsinki for telecom companies before returning back to Wall Street, New York City, where I am now. And I kind of saw it all. I saw the ups and downs in the company and companies that were too big to fail and then experienced a significant downturn. So I didn't just theoretically looked from the outside in on what was going on inside the organization. I was actually on the management teams, and I had to deal with a whole range of issues associated with talent and strategic talent management, both
Yes.
again on the upside where people were promoted and rewarded and all the good things associated with that, and on the downside when the business was contracting, when people needed to be laid off, when their organizations were in significant distress. And what became very clear to me obviously from the very beginning, because I was in strategic human resource management, was that there's a lot of room for improvement in managing people in organizations. And I think we're experiencing right now a huge disruption to the traditional business models and a turn to a much more humane, possibly much more humane way of managing people. And that might sound ironic to you because you would say, what about automation? What about other robots coming in,
Yes.
etc.? And I think that that's a very, very interesting tension. As we're getting more machines in, there's a huge opportunity to become more humane in how we manage people and what we do with people who come and join companies and the broader ecosystem of contractors, communities, and partners that companies work with.
Yeah, as you said, very interesting for us when we think about with all the new technologies coming in. A lot of it is looking at replacing some of the, let's say, activities that people do. You use a fantastic phrase there, attention. And I think that's becoming apparent in organizations today. What is that? We'll drill in a little bit, maybe a bit more later on as to what that tension might be and where it's coming from. But certainly, as you said, we talk about this fourth industrial revolution with the change of technologies and all these things. What does it mean for us? So that's something that I think we'll come back to in a moment. Now, I also see that you're currently working on a book which has a working title. I love this: "The End of Talent Management as We Know It." Now, can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? What the end of talent management as we know it? What's changing, and what is this?
I think it's really fundamentally, and again, has to do with not only the tactical changes that are occurring on the ground, which is the automation that we see, but also a huge philosophical shift. I mentioned that I was the head of global talent for big companies, et cetera. And the whole premise of talent management economy, as we called it, or the kind of the dominant management architecture that existed in companies and still is, it's a legacy one, was focused on what was called high potential culture. It was all about, the theory goes that 20% of your, at most 20% of your employees are talent, they deliver 80% of value. You need to disproportionately invest in 20%. And that's what constituted this whole talent management architecture, starting
Yeah.
from identifying that high potentials, developing high potentials, rewarding high potentials, retaining high potentials. And so when we started measuring, and I'm a very big analytics and technology person when it comes to HR, we can discuss that later. But when we started really measuring things like engagement, and the data were showing us that the engagement is very low. You get, a 70, 67, and whatever the numbers are, but close to the 70% of the population is disengaged.
Yes.
Then the questions started coming up, why is that the case? And obviously, and that all had to do with this kind of asymmetrical management of people in organizations with prioritization of the 20%. And I'm not even going to start talking about the bias associated with those systems that were set up to select that 20%. That were 20% is a big number, usually the 10.
Yes. Yeah.
And you are familiar with that. And that's what, became known as the talent management organization. The organization focused on talent. My premise is that in the economy we are in right now, it's about personalization and it's about employee experience. Everyone is a talent. Everyone deserves to be invested in and paid attention to. And so we are moving from 10% to 100%. And that shift is not possible without the technology that's becoming available to us to scale the services that were only available to the select few. And obviously, companies are now revisiting the whole scaffolding that was put around this philosophy of 10% to break it all down and to see how can we build the systems, how can we build the processes, how can we build the architecture that will support 100% of people working for companies.
That's an amazing shift from 10% to 100%. And now I think if that's reality, which is, as you said, that's what you're seeing. Part of the challenge, though, is in the mindset that you almost said we have legacy thinking now. A lot of organizations, when you mention legacy, will think about legacy IT systems and replacing all of those with digital systems. I wonder how many organizations are thinking like this, saying our talent management, that 10% mindset is now a legacy mindset for the situation we're in today. And the label, we call that fourth industrial revolution or all things digital, whatever labels we want to put on. And I think, or do you think, is that a big challenge with organizations now to recognize that they're moving from this 10% to, the employee experience 100%, that we should invest in everybody as opposed to this mythical top 10 best people in the organization?
Yeah, no, of course, because the hardest thing to change is people's behavior, as we know.
Yes.
Even with the neuroscience now helping us a bit to look under the hood and see what actually happens at the brain level and why is it so hard for us to change, to innovate, and it's so I would say, of course, it is not an easy change. And it's not necessarily happening top down. With some companies it does, with others it's a slower process. So you kind of have a spectrum right now. I would say that the majority of senior managers or CEOs, even level, the C-suite level in companies will tell you that it's in the Deloitte measuring it, it's around 70+% of companies are saying employee experience is the most important kind of talent orientation that we have. But in terms of actual implementation of employee experience, it's in maybe 15-20% only of companies that actually are doing something about it. No one has arrived, but companies that are actually moving in that direction. So in terms of actually making the shift, we are at this point of strategy execution gap. There is an understanding of where we need to be, but there's a lot of gravity that pulls us back into, where we are coming from. And clearly hundreds and thousands of people have been socialized in a very different system,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult to give up that power that certain people gathered, being in the 10%, because they're the ones who are making decisions now. So there's a really interesting dynamic that's developing now in companies. And I think why I feel that I am sort of a person with a mission is because I see it so clearly that I can explain, articulate, and really create a pathway
Yeah.
and help companies to get there.
Yeah, I think that's very important that again they're help to get there. As you said, nobody has yet arrived, but we certainly need to have them on the journey there. So Anna, you're teaching at New York University, you're lecturing around the world, and one of the areas of the expertise you're lecturing on is this thing called human capital management. I think you've covered a little bit of it, but can you explain to us a little bit more about what human capital management is about?
Yeah, I mean, human capital management is just one of the terms that apply to the people function in the companies. And it's also in some ways a legacy name. We developed from personnel, which was a purely transactional administrative function in companies, in full support of management, really just the paperwork and administration, to HR, human resource management, where people were resources.
Yeah,
Then we kind of moved into the financial in the 80s and 90s, into the financial models around companies, and we put, some, value into the human assets that were considered to
yeah,
be, so that's where the capital comes in, because we started measuring the human assets in financial terms. But now we are in experience, as I said. Now we're talking about people experience. We're talking about a function that is much more distributed and diffused, and obviously is looking at more holistically at the
mm,
the subject of our attention in companies,
yeah,
which is people. Unfortunately, if you're at the university, you kind of have to deal with the titles that are standard for these types of functions, and they're understandable, human capital. But if it were me, I would be, more in the people function. But to a lot of people, it doesn't signal, what it used to be. So
yeah.
it's just a question of terminology and the time.
It's interesting you said we've gone from being recognized as human resources to then human assets to now that user experience or human experience seems to be going up the value chain there, which is
Yeah.
interesting. I've seen so many organizations try and address the human experience or employee experience solely with technology. If we bring in these technologies, we'll increase the experience around here. And I'm amazed because generally they will decrease the experience if it's only a technologically driven approach to doing something, to getting up the value chain with people, because people don't get the experience out of it, or you take away the interactions, the human element of people with the technologies the way they're trying to do it. So I think they have to be careful with that they don't over engineer or think to engineer the experience side with technology alone. Would you agree that you can't make this move without bringing the people with you? Would that be clear? Would that be a clear statement?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why, I at NYU, I created a master's in science degree in human capital analytics and technology, which is both the behavioral sciences
Yeah.
and the analytics and technology, because
Yes,
I don't think you can bring data scientists or technologists into HR and think that you're going to solve people's issues.
I
That's
don't
not
think
at
so.
all. In fact, to your point about overwhelming people with technology, on the one hand, yes, I mean, we just, our brains again can't cope with so much change and transition. That's one thing. On the other, there's something psychologically new that's beginning to be recognized as an issue. It's called the experience deficit. I mean, it's a term that's behaviorally recognized as a downside of bringing in so much technology. As it turns out, as humans, for us to process something, we do need time, we do need reflection, we do need a social interaction
Yeah.
if certain changes need to occur. And by creating these shortcuts through, immediate delivery through technology, which seems to be more efficient on the sides of speed and acceleration, we're actually creating deficits on the behavioral side and psychologically, which are the downsides of which we do not yet exactly know, but we're already
Yeah.
seeing it in education significantly when we're bringing students in who are in this digital natives, people coming in who've been educated in already digital age, and there are
Yes.
some certain significant, again, deficits in what we would consider the full human experience. So I think we are learning to be living with technology because it's not an option anymore.
Yes.
But we're learning also the downsides, and we need to be more proactively addressing these types of deficits and understanding the impact that technology will have longer
Yes.
term, not just the short term efficiencies that the business might be looking at.
Yeah, I think that that's very important for our listeners to have a think about that human deficit. And it grows. The more you throw technology to try and solve this, that deficit probably grows because you've an unequal balance now. Too much technology and not enough of the human element. And a common theme that relates to this that we've had on a lot of these sessions, these talks, is the recognition that we've gone from highly manufacturing industries into service industries, which are now being or moving into the knowledge industry. And that seems to be where we are, and it's a completely different thing. The same way moving from manufacturing to services required people to do differently, act differently, be differently, and be educated differently and have different technologies. I think that's now happening from the services industry into this knowledge industry. And it's not a direct shift that you immediately stop one and start the other. Um, and one of those questions I have for you, while businesses might be recognizing this with the work, say, that you do and what you're teaching is, do you think the individuals, the humans themselves, the individuals in jobs, do you think they recognize any of this, how significant this might be on them, or are they unaware of it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, all humans are different, right? So it really depends. Most of us are reactive to these types of changes, and that's
Mm.
what it's creating a lot of stress because people are unprepared. It happens to them, and then only then, to your point, they become aware. I think what we need to be doing, and this is where I think there's a lot of focus in my field right now, is trying to be predictive. That the area that's growing really fast, and we also teach it in our program, is workforce planning, understanding of the rate of obsolescence of skills, and not
Yes.
even at the jobs level. We're not talking about jobs. We're breaking down jobs into skills, because every job there's no, I mean, the category of jobs is going away.
Hmm.
We need to understand what's involved. People are much bigger than jobs, right? What's involved, what kinds of skills, both soft and hard skills, are needed. And what's interesting about what's happening now, it's not all skills at once go away. We only notice, I mean, in how we talk about it, it's kind of mechanically, there were jobs and now there are no jobs. but it's much more subtle. And these changes are occurring not only at the job level. Again, that's too big, and it happens, overnight, and that's reactive. But it's a gradual transition. Parts of
Yes.
jobs are being automated. And so the environment we're going to be living in is going to be augmented. Every job is going to be augmented with technology. So pretty much no one is going to be immune to these types of transitions. And so where we're at now, because again, I like my role of being on the solution side of
Mm.
these types of issues that are so central to the future of our society, is to figure out how we can be more predictive about these types of changes happening, and how we could be more proactive in creating educational pathways, and learning pathways. And they don't have to be necessarily education with a capital E.
Yes.
We know that they're learning in the flow of work, reskilling, all of these types of things that technology, again, is helping us to be more efficient in acquiring the new skills and transitioning. But the trick here, to what you just asked, is to go from reactive to proactive.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's where, again, smart technologies, AI, analytics are helping us to make that shift. If we are predictive about it and prescriptive around educational pathways and put resources behind it and knowledge, I think we're going to eliminate a lot of pain and a lot of disruption that we're experiencing now. Because
Yes.
now it's happening because, again, we are kind of waiting until it happens, and then it's too late.
It's always too late. It's always too late. Um, you mentioned something there. I think you said, I thought about it. We're bigger than the jobs we do. But
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges that has been found is that a lot of people self-identify with the jobs that they do, and they attach a lot of, I think, self-worth to that job and the job that they do. And now that we're in this world of absolute change, it is happening quicker, faster than change has ever happened before. I think that's impacting, at least in the conversations I've been having with organizations as well. I can see that having an impact on everybody in the organization, from the decision makers right down to the lower levels in an organization, that even the people, let's say, in power are actually struggling to get to grips with what's changing, how's it going to affect me, never mind the rest of the staff here. So there's a bit of self-survival, I think, for people, because of the way they attach, not everybody, but some people will attach self-worth to the job that they do based on the role and the position that they have. And I think all that's being challenged as well at the moment. At least that's what we
And my,
see.
my response to this will be, people are attached to work. Work is, oxygen for humans. Uh,
Yeah.
so, and that's different from jobs. Um, and for as long as we understand that and
Yeah.
value and create opportunities for people to be engaged socially and work,
Yeah.
that is going to be, that's how we need to be reframing the whole conversation about jobs, because it's not about jobs. Jobs are going to come and go.
And we've seen that in the past.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we are hardwired to work
Yes.
and to be productive, to be socially connected with people and achieve outcomes. We are, somewhat, maybe competitive at some level, different degrees of competitive, but there are
Yeah.
a lot of the whole range of human emotion is associated with work. And we talk about the dignity of work.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening is, if people have been trained in such a linear way, and if they're associated with a job, that's where the fragility of this type of concept comes.
Yes.
That's where it breaks down. if I'm only thinking of myself as a coal miner, I see the shelf life of that profession as very narrow, as very short.
Yes.
And so, and that's what, the politicians obviously take advantage of it. They're going to say, if I want to win this population, I'm going to put the coal miners back into the coal mine. And,
Yeah.
and that's not how these types of issues need to be resolved.
Yes.
What you
Yeah.
need is to give people opportunity to work. You have to find what they would be good at, the skills. This is where, again, the unit of measure is a skill,
Hmm.
and what are the equivalent skills that we could be, training them in, that will be relevant to the next economy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it turns out that there are quite a few skills out there. And again, if you develop the ability with the help of technology, et cetera, to identify, the kind of the strengths of people, et cetera, and develop those skills, and then create work environments for them where they can be deployed. This is why when people lose jobs,
Hmm.
we always tell them volunteer. Don't just isolate yourself and just be
Yes.
looking for that job. When you volunteer, you actually are continuing to develop yourself, and you're participating in the flow of work, and you're participating in society. So that's the way we need to be thinking about it.
That's fantastic. That's really good. One of the things we did recent survey report from the CCC, the Global Digital Skills Survey. One of the critical findings that we got from that survey was that organizations today are requiring people, are looking for people that have the ability to acquire skills and acquire them quickly and use those skills, as opposed to looking for people that have, degrees and other types of, career spanning knowledge or experience. It seems to be moving along this trajectory in the fourth industrial revolution, that one of the key things they're looking for is an ability for people to learn and relearn quickly and reapply, regardless of what they've had in the past. It always reminds me of this phrase, what got us here will not keep us here. And I think that is so relevant today, that you're not going to get a 40-year career from the degree you had 20 years ago in today's. You just won't exist, because the jobs are changing, the skill requirement, everything's changing so fast. And as you said, we see a lot in these talks, a lot of automation coming through, technology automating half of somebody's job. So you've got to be able to acquire new skills and transition and change throughout your career, which I think is the skill in itself that people need to have. Some people say it's more difficult for the older cohorts than the younger. I'm not convinced of that. I think it's probably uh, a human trait. Are you able to learn and relearn, as opposed to how old are you, and should younger people learn better than older people? I don't think that's how it works. But I think that's part of what's happening on that phrase. What got us here will not keep us here. I think is ever so relevant. Um, as part of that, Anna, you talk about this new world of work, which is what we're in today. You've spoken about, I'll just quote here, what we need most is a practical guide to the brave new world of work, where talent connects to employment wherever and whenever it finds the best fit. Can you elaborate? I think that's a fantastic phrase. We're going to write about that in the blog, but can you explain that in a little bit more detail, where you're coming from?
I first wanted to respond to your first question about education and learning, right?
Yes.
Because I think it's really, really important. And there's some, just really, really briefly. I
Sure.
mean, I think what we're trying to identify in people, and that, the skill is sort of cognitive capacity for learning, and we call it learning agility. So as we are finding that we have a um, different capability for learning agility, the
Yes.
humans. First of all, no one could be competing with a 3-year-old in the speed of learning, So I think, when it comes to, trying to gauge the right age to learn, the 3-year-old will outpass everyone else in how
Absolutely.
much they learn and how fast. And it's just, so let's park it there. And then I think that some of the breakthroughs in research, in brain research, has actually shown us, and that's a scientific phenomenon. It's called neuroplasticity. And what we found, actually, human brains learn all the time. There's no
Yes.
limit. We used to think that after 40 we kind of freeze in time, and that's not the case. And it's we are biologically programmed to learn. And the other thing I would say, that what we are going to need is all kinds of learning. Those quick, just in time, upskilling and relearning, we absolutely need that, but it's not limited to that. We will need what's right now becoming the more of a deficit is critical thinking and some deeper learning, research, etc. Those skills are so becoming much rarer. And I would say, if I could offer a metaphor for this,
Yeah.
and that would be kind of the hardware and software of learning. We will have the education, kind of more deeper type of education will be needed with a lot of experience and conditioning. That's going to be developing that hardware, including the hardware for learning. And then we will have to always be acquiring some new skills, like using
Yeah.
new tools, technologies, etc. That's kind of the software, like the apps. You can switch them on and off several a day, and that's so we're going to be very complex learning machines, and not machines is not a good word, but learning humans.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of research is now is going about, breaking the code on the learning. How can we learn really, really fast and unlearn, and what it takes? So that's going to be really a secret to the longevity of us in the job. So I really wanted to respond to that. And
Oh,
then your last question, if you could just briefly repeat it so that we are on the same page.
yeah. So a quote that I found from yourself is, you're talking about what we need is a practical guide to this brave new world, where the talent connects to the employment wherever and whenever it finds the best fit. I thought that was really, really good.
Right, right. And that's, again, without technology, we can't do that. We have to and everyone is focused on finding that job, right? And finding that job. And the other aspect of this conversation has been around global. If we can work virtually, then, I can be in New York, you could be in Glasgow, and we are still collaborating, we are still working on a project, et cetera. So those are the most kind of highlighted aspects of this type of connection. But
Yes.
I would say what we are also advancing right now in this whole area of connecting to the right opportunities is a whole universe of self-assessments, reflections, understanding your skills, kind of internally focused, psychologically. What's good for me?
Yes.
What motivates me for a job, etc. And I think that element is often under represented in these discussions. But I think understanding your purpose and helping people understand what they're good at and what they're motivated by is a big element of that. And we have more accessible assessment tools right now. We are also scaling coaching. I mentioned that at NYU I developed a new program, a new master's degree, the first one in the US, in executive coaching and organizational consulting. But we are working with several companies that have, again, software and are delivering coaching and everything from therapy clinical coaching to, more advanced types of executive coaching could be delivered at any point in any time. So
Yes.
not only do we have the infrastructure, the tracks that we laid out through technology to deliver people to those opportunities and for those opportunities to find the right people, but we are also helping people to deeper connect with whatever they want to do by knowing themselves and having
Yeah.
support systems that they can organize themselves through, consultants, the right networks, coaches, etc., to be really self-identifying as the right person in the right place at the right time.
I love that, and I think that's a big change for me, and a welcome change that I'm seeing. That it's not we need 10 square things that fit in 10 square holes. It's now looking at the individual. How will you contribute to our business the best way you can contribute to our business with the best of your skills and abilities? And it's another phrase that it stays with me for a long time, is never judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. I think that applies to what you're saying here as well. We're looking at trying to identify the individual themselves and how they contribute, rather than here's how we want you to do things in this environment. And so I think that's the evolution, going
Yeah.
back to human capital management. Fantastic to hear it. We know where to go if we want some of this coaching, training, and education. You're the expert. You've got the master's course on that, and great to see the research as well going on behind that as well. That's really good. One other quote that I was drawn to, it's from your 7 paradoxes of note for HR, which are on your personal list for 2020. I was drawn to this one. Now people can check that out if they look for it. Number 1. And this is your quote: people are not going away. The opposite is the case. Automation leads to greater focus on employee experience. And I think you've covered a lot of what that means in our conversation today. It's as clear to me now. I was going to ask you to go into that in a bit of detail, but I think our last 30 minutes have really covered that the opposite is the case. You do recognize automation, you do recognize it is coming in more and more, but the best bit was it's leading to greater focus on the employee experience. And I think that's key. I think there's a lesson, or there's some learning there to our listeners to have a think about that. So one of your 7 paradoxes for HR on your 2020 list, that's number 1. I urge people to go and think about that a little bit more. Can I ask, Anna, what does the future hold for human capital management in general? Will it reach a critical mass? What's the time period? Is it next year? Is it 5 years? When do we see all of this really getting, into hold in organizations?
Yes. So first of all, I think there is a very definite centrality of this function for companies.
Yeah.
I think what I'm seeing, and you've talked about these consecutive revolutions, we have moved from using the muscle on the job, that was the job, using the muscle, to now using the brain, and you kept talking about the knowledge economy, etc.
Yeah.
And we're moving into the economy of the heart. Really, and that's not here yet. We're still in the brain, kind of, but it's going to be about being supremely human. We're going
Yeah.
to find out what that humanity is, because we will have all the technology to, replace the horsepower, right?
Yeah.
And even
Yeah.
outpace us when it comes to intelligent automation and some of the intelligent functions, with
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
scale of data processing and AI that's coming in,
Yes.
and lots of
Yes.
other things. But I think that kind of humanity in us, the heart, the emotions, the empathy, etc., that's what's going to be at a prime in
Yeah.
companies. And again, you already see companies talking about, and it used to be just a poster on the wall, but now it's becoming a true meaning, where they talk about the purpose. They're talking about deeper values, where, for example, even look at the evolution of diversity and inclusion function.
Mm,
It
mm,
started out with pure compliance,
yeah,
reporting. That was a compliance function. You had to report that you've done it, check the box, move on, nothing changes. And we are now have much more nuanced tools of measuring that inclusion and surfacing the value of our human diversity that's contributing to the bottom line, if you'd like.
yeah,
So I think we are going to see the a huge sort of resurgence of this interest in what makes us human, and the business is going to put the premium, speaking about capital and assets, etc., a premium on these qualities
yeah,
that we are going to be able to harvest. And that's a dream, for me, and I'm working toward that. It's not just abstract.
yes,
To be able to, you know bring, leverage and harvest those amazing unique qualities, what makes us human. Everything else, we will have the machines to do it, and
mm,
they're going to be intelligent machines. They're going to look like us. We won't even know who is a machine and who is not in some cases, and that will be harder because it's all
mm,
going to be around augmentation. But to reach that level of, cohesion and nirvana, if you want, we really still have this huge unexplored area of human emotions at work. This is
yeah,
this is the next frontier, and we're just putting the toe, when we talk about wellness and stress, and we're only seeing the kind of the when it breaks down, again, kind of
yeah,
being reactive. We
yeah,
see when it's breaking down and how bad it is. And that's kind of the business case we're making, is saying you got to treat people nice, because if you don't, these are the bad things that are going to happen.
yeah,
But I think we're going to learn to look on the bright side and really see and it will be a big aha moment to all of us to turn around and say, we wish we knew it before, that what brings us together, what makes this business successful, is the diversity of all of these human qualities that are contributing to the success and the outcomes that we're seeing. So anyway, that's
yeah.
kind of a very, very high level picture, but
That's
I
good.
don't think it's unrealistic.
That's good. I think hindsight is a wonderful thing. We'll see what happens there. And I think again, what we're hearing in a lot of these conversations is the more technology we're starting to use, the more human we're going to have to become. I think it's an amazing mindset to get into, but we have to move ourselves to become more human, I think, because of otherwise we get lost in all this automation. And the one thing that fascinates me about the human race as a species, I think, is our diversity. And I think that's critical. As I said, we're different. We have different views, and they all add to it. Now, Anna, normally at this stage we do a few quick fire questions with you. Not doing that today. Going to change things a little bit. We'll see how it works. They tell me, Mark, don't break the formula. And I go, sure, I'm diverse anyway, so let's give it a go. So instead of asking you some questions, I'm going to ask you quick fire, now maybe about 30 seconds or so, see what your response is on some of these articles that you've written. You've written a lot of articles in this space over the last number of years. We've gone in, I've had a read through a lot of them. They're fantastic. And I'm just going to call you out some of the article headings and tell me what does it mean. Give us 30 seconds quick fire on it. So first one, recalibrating workforce planning for the 21st century organization in a quick fire 30 seconds. What's that all about?
And we discussed that it really is being predictive about the changes that will happen at scale. And
Yeah,
not just, again, individuals, but how can we predict how the composition of your workforce will change within the 5-10 years, and give some advice and prepare for that change so that it
yeah.
doesn't come as a surprise. We're not reactive, we are proactive about the workforce.
Fantastic. Another one you wrote about, the adaptability challenge. I know we've covered some of it, but if you get that down to about 30
Yeah.
seconds, what are you covering in there?
I mean, the adaptability is a must these days. It's no longer an option.
Yep.
Everyone has to be adaptive, and the challenge is that we don't like to be adaptive. And the organizations have, legacy structures. People are attached to their titles and jobs. So we
Mm,
have those hangups. We do not like to change. That's part of our survival instinct,
mm.
and change is threatening. So that's why adaptability is a challenge, but it's also a must. It's a goal.
Yeah, I think that's eye-opening there. You talk about the promise and peril of teams. Sure, everybody's working in a team and we're all collaborating. That's the promise. But what are the perils?
Well, the perils is, it's very difficult to be on a team.
Isn't it
As
just?
much as, especially diverse teams, we know for a fact that we almost have to change, we definitely have to change our mental models about success, for example,
Yeah.
and be very aware and non-biased. So that's why teams is the future. At the same time, it's also a learning curve. We
Mm,
are not, because most of the time teams kind of happened, good teams, successful teams happened almost by accident. We have not really researched them as much before, but now we are paying a lot more attention. So what makes a team successful? And part of that formula will be the ability to work through challenges and resistance and
mm.
the downsides, and manage your diversity for the benefit of the team rather than fall apart as a team. So there are lots of pros and cons to the team, and it's up to us to learn how to do it more effectively.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen firsthand over the years successful teams happening by accident, the majority of them, and then having success almost by accident too, which
Exactly.
amazed me. You talk about why is HR pursuing agile light? So everybody's doing agile. Why is HR doing a light version of it?
Because there is, and like in every trend, there is a very orthodox way of applying agile. As you know, it could be very formulaic, and uh, and unfortunately, because HR works with humans most of the time, we know that no one fits into just one way of doing things. We talked about diversity, that was the running theme of our
Mhm.
conversation.
Yeah.
So I think that as much as the agile formula that we inherited from software development can be applied across various processes, when it comes to humans and working on some very, very human, decisions, we need to be more nuanced in how
Mhm.
it's applied, and maybe less orthodox in application of some of the processes, but more open-minded and treat it more as again as a mental model, a mindset of agility and adaptability than just a set of formulas.
Yeah, I think you could almost apply that approach to most agile projects or implementations or whatever phrase we're going to use.
Exactly.
And I think the last one here, learning 2030 beyond technology. So we're looking 10 years into the future. Um, will we be there with this human capital management? Will we have arrived, or will we still be on the journey, or will we have fixed it all with technology?
I don't think we'll ever arrive. That's the beauty of it. So
I love it.
let's
Yeah.
set to meet in 10 years and see where we are. But I think what I said is that it will be a really interesting um, interesting evolution of
Yeah.
technology and humans, that interaction
Yeah.
of people and technology, as well as us better understanding who we are, how we are hardwired,
Yeah.
what we know about ourselves, and really accommodating and developing technologies that are going to make us more powerful, more impactful, more intelligent, and all the good things associated with that. And obviously paying attention to what we don't know and what's going to fall through the cracks, and we're going to find ourselves in the privacy hell, and whatever the next thing that we didn't
Yeah.
anticipate is going to hit us. I think that's kind of going to be the path for the next 10 years.
I think it's an interesting path. It's a journey. It's not the destination. It is the journey. I think it can be a journey with a very interesting view if you want to open your eyes and look at it. And you reminded me of one of the other critical findings, just as we finish up. We found from our survey was organizations don't know what they don't know. And that's one of their biggest gaps and challenges, whether it's technology, whether it's human capital management, whatever that is. They don't know what they don't know. And it's almost as if, let's not look under the rock to see what's there, because that will mean change and difficulty and upheaval. But I think we've got to be brave. On our previous talks, we had somebody say we need managers and leaders with guts that will do something that may fail, but at least they're learning. It's not, I always say, that phrase, it's not failure if you've learned from it. It certainly is if you do it and repeat it and do it again, the definition of insanity. But
Yeah.
if you do it, if you get this wrong, learn where you got it wrong and be stronger the next time and tell your staff and work with people. I think that that's a good view. Now, Anna, before we finish, have you any final words on how organizations can continue to get the best from their talent, how they can keep them, or how they should develop their staff in this digital age? Any closing words for us?
So I think, just start focusing more on people, because people have been a second thought and maybe third or fourth on the agenda of the CEOs. And now we're seeing that it's coming front and center. And when business people who are very smart, very efficient if they put their minds and their hearts to achieving those goals, and that's kind of the appeal to the management. I think that's where we are going to be on a good path. It's still not going to be easy, but it's certainly going to be a, a better experience for all, and we'll get there faster if we have the right leadership moving us in the right direction.
Well, some of the best advice we get on these calls have come at the very end, and it's always the most simplest of advice. I mean, they're focus on the people. They've been third or fourth down a list. I find that amazing. People should be top of the list. They're the talent. They're the things that make things happen. They're the people that think, do, and act. And the automation just helps do parts of their job. So focus on the people. Anna Tavis, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on today's CCC Talks. We've got so much insights into this fascinating world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All the best to you. Bye bye.